Have you noticed how every backpacking YouTuber makes a video about their new gear for the year? Sure, it's fun to see the new stuff and hear about their reasoning behind the choices, but what you really need to know is how did that stuff turn out from last year? Hey guys, I'm Dan from Shastabubba Adventures, and I'm as bad as all the rest in my glee over doing this show and tell, and I'm going to be doing that again in the next video, which will be new gear for 2024. But before all that, I wanted to do a quick recap of the gear that was new in 2023 and let you know how did things actually turn out, what worked and what sucked. If you missed that video, I'll put a link to it up here, and you might want to see that one first because I'm going to go in the same order as in that video and not go into as much detail on the choices. And stick around because I'm going to tell you about one bit of gear that works so well, I'm giving it an honorable mention for best new gear of 2023. By the way, there will be a link to all the gear I'm talking about in the description below if you want to check that out. Well, it's a blustery spring day in northwest Montana, so great time to hole up in the cabin by a warm fire and talk gear. Although I'm taking this gear in the same order as before, like I said, it just happens that I'm starting with gear that either didn't work for me or the testing was inconclusive. First up was the upgrade to the newer version of the X-Mid 2, worth it just for the magnetic door holders. Well, sort of. They work well, and I'm happy with them, although they could be just a tiny bit more powerful to hold better. But one person in the comments criticized me for not just adding those myself, and I have to admit, he probably was right. I'm not very crafty with sewing projects though, so for me, the money it cost to upgrade was worth saving the time and tears involved to do it myself. But if you're more adept with a sewing machine than I am, you probably could make that upgrade yourself and it wouldn't be worth buying a whole new tent. Next, I invested in the Silpoly X-Mid 1 to see whether it might rival my Locust Gear Kufu for weight and comfort. Gonna have to say the jury is still out on this one. I did have 4 nights in the X-Mid 1 and was getting more used to the different routine involved in where to keep the gear so that I could find it in the dark, but I'm not ready to retire the Kufu just yet. As you might know, my season got cut short due to illness, so I really want to spend more nights in the X-Mid 1 before I can say with confidence which tent I prefer. A complicating factor is that I also scored an X-Mid Pro 2 this year, so I plan to alternate between these two shelters on my trips this summer and see which is the best for me as a solo hiker. Now you might recall me saying that I don't like hybrid shelters like the X-Mid Pros due to the problems with condensation, but my experience with the one-person Pro was positive, so that made me willing to give the Pro 2 a chance, thinking that for a one-person sleeping in the two-person space, it would be easier to avoid brushing against the walls and maybe condensation wouldn't be such a problem. I probably wouldn't have invested in a new Pro 2, but since I had the opportunity to get it used, I couldn't pass up the possibility of a super light shelter that might do everything for me, provide lots of space, shelter from wind and rain, and bug protection with less weight than my Kufu combo. Moving on, I can now say that I have given the Sawyer Squeeze a fair try, and I still don't like it. Granted, it works much better than the Sawyer Mini did for me, but I'm just so spoiled by the ease of the SteriPen that I'm going to stick with that. It's so convenient to just simply sit it in the bottle and let it do the work for me while I'm eating gorp versus the effort it takes to actually hold a bag of water in the air and squeeze the water through the Sawyer filter. Wah, I know that sounds pretty wimpy, but it makes a difference when I'm tired at the end of a long day on the trail. Also, on my winter trip, when it got down to 20 degrees at night, the Sawyer filter might have frozen. And sure, you can put it in a Ziploc and keep it in the quilt to avoid that, but my SteriPen Ultra worked great even in that cold, so that was reassuring. The one situation where I will continue to take the Sawyer Squeeze instead of the SteriPen is on early season hikes. With the extra sediment in the streams from spring runoff, you might as well use the filter since it would be necessary to use a pre-filter for the SteriPen anyway, although the Sawyer can clog too, so you don't want to overdo it. Next up was the Sahara hoodie from REI. So this was both a test of the concept of wearing a hoodie on the trail and of this specific garment. The Sahara hoodie has a really great feel to it, and it was a great price for a hoodie, but it seemed a bit on the heavy side to me, and I was a lot happier wearing it for sleeping gear and on cold weather hikes for warmth versus using it to keep cool on a sunny day. An aspect of that strategy no one talks about is that it depends on evaporative cooling of sweat, just like how human skin works, but less efficient. The hoodie gets saturated with sweat, the sweat evaporates gradually, and that produces a cooling effect, which means that wearing a hoodie on a hot day means feeling clammy all day long. Sure, it works, but it's just not a great feeling. On my second hike, I switched to a different hoodie with lighter material, and I did enjoy that one more. This hoodie was a swag gift from my buddy Eric from his Glacier Rod Company, and it had a more effective moisture transfer, so it felt much less like wearing a wet rag. Ultimately, though, I don't think hoodies are the thing for me. What I plan to do instead this year is wearing one of my favorite shirts, which is this one, the quarter zip Echo Mesh from OR, and pair that with a wide-brimmed hat. The high collar on this shirt will help cover the neck, and the zip will provide tons of venting options, and the hat should shade the rest of the neck. Which brings me to the Sahara Guide hat from REI that I didn't get a chance to try on the trail last year, so stay tuned to hear more about how this combo works out in reality. So much for the stuff that didn't work. Now I get to talk about a couple of things that worked out really well. First up is the GoPro Hero 11. This camera has completely changed the way I film hikes. It's so much easier to use than my previous more complex cameras, and the quality of the footage is awesome. With the push of one button, the camera turns on and begins filming video. I keep it on the linear settings so that the wide angle distortion is at a minimum, and whatever I'm shooting at is always in focus. The stabilization is fantastic, so I can shoot walking down the trail without making the viewers seasick, and I can film in the rain and even underwater. I really love using this camera on hikes, but there are some downsides. As expected, I lost the ability to zoom in. However, I have figured out that it's possible to do a limited amount of zoom in post-production, and it still looks great. A bigger problem is battery life. This thing really eats the batteries like popcorn, and they're really expensive. Now, I can compensate for that by bringing along a power bank, but it also means I can't just set up the camera for extended shot that I plan to edit later, like setting up the shelter. So I have to be a little more selective with the shots I take. Another problem is that although it has a function for taking still photos, I really don't like the way they look due to the distortion around the edges, even on the linear setting. For that reason, I plan to go back to carrying my Sony RX100 as well as the GoPro, and I don't think I'll mind that because the Sony takes great stills and will function as the backup for the GoPro if I run out of batteries or if it locks up in the cold, which it did on my winter trip, and that's another flaw with this camera. It hasn't been reliable in the cold for me. I know when I list out all the drawbacks, it makes the GoPro sound not that great, but really the benefits far outweigh the flaws. And I haven't even touched on the really cool time-lapse stuff it will do. One of the things that makes the GoPro so convenient to use is that I paired it with this selfie stick from Newest. Now, I was worried that the size of the handle would be too big, but it's actually been just fine. And even though this unit costs less than 30 bucks, it works just as well today as when it was new. I figured out that I can just hold it out like this if I want a selfie clip that's like a talking head framing, and if I want to show more of the body or a wider view, just extend a section or two and I can get that shot quick and easy. I also decided to cut the seam on the bottom of the shoulder pocket on my Kakwa 40, sorry Dan, and that makes this combo super convenient to use because it just hangs right there handy when I'm hiking along. When I want to use it, I can just pull it out, press that one button, and I'm doing the trip report thing. If I want to take a tripod shot of me hiking past the camera, I just have to flip out the legs and set it down. Another amazing feature of the GoPro is that it maintains a level horizon even with the camera tipped, so I no longer have to fiddle around leveling the camera before taking the shot. This setup works so much easier, and this tripod selfie stick from Newest works so well for me. This is the one I'm giving an honorable mention to for Best New Gear of 2023. And it's even still available for the same price on Amazon. Couple of quick side notes. The GoPro has now come out with a Hero 11, but I haven't figured out all the bells and whistles of the 11, so I'm not concerned about upgrading anytime soon. Also, the selfie stick came with a remote that was in a bracket right here. I just removed that because it wouldn't pair with the GoPro, and that's fine because I wouldn't have used it anyway. The GoPro has a time delay capture feature, so you really don't need a remote in most situations. Next up are the camp chairs, the Flex Light from REI and the Crazy Creek Hex 2. Now these both turned out pretty much the way I expected. The Crazy Creek is much easier to pull out and use on short breaks beside the trail, while the Flex Light takes way too much time, and I was only willing to go to the effort of assembling the Flex Light in camp. On the other hand, the Flex Light is much more comfortable, so it just depends on the situation which chair is the best to use. The Hex chair is better for unstable surfaces like sand and snow, but it will soak through if you're sitting in the snow for too long. I'm going to have to call this a tie because these two issues cancel each other out, and in the end, I'm kind of glad to have both so that I can fine-tune according to my needs in a given situation. Having said that, I intend to keep using my 2-ounce Thermarest sit pad on all my solo hikes because I rarely spend much time in camp on those trips, and the sit pad is certainly much quicker to deploy than either chair, although of course it's much less comfortable. Now that I'm saying this, it occurs to me that since the Crazy Creek chair is 4 ounces heavier than the Flex Light, a good option might be to carry the Flex Light for camp and the sit pad for short breaks by the trail. You would still be 2 ounces lighter than the Crazy Creek and have more options for use. Last and certainly not least, my insulated growler from, well, it was called Growler Works, but it has since changed the name to Perfect Works. Now I'll be honest, with my hiking season cut short, I wasn't able to try this in the field. The only hikes I was able to do were still in cool weather, so a cold beer at the end of the hike wasn't really all that appealing. I did try it at home though, and it worked great. The CO2 cartridge deployed the beer at a good rate and lasted as long as the beer did. There were no leaks and the valve is still good and solid. Although one basic fact presented a problem, it dawned on me that even when you go to the microbrewery and get a growler, that beer is already carbonated. So using the CO2 cartridge pretty much doubled the carbonation, which really isn't the goal. Now I took this growler into the brewery and had them fill it directly, but I think it would work better if I just bought a regular growler from the brewery and brought it home and poured it into the Perfect Works growler, releasing the carbonation in the process. Then the CO2 would put carbonation back in, but not too much, and I think it's a smoother carbonation anyway. I'll give that a try and let you know how that works out. By the way, I was worried about storing this growler in the truck on a warm day and risking the CO2 cartridge exploding, but another light bulb moment, I realized I could just bring the cartridge along and not charge it into the growler until the end of the hike, ready for use. So we'll see how that works out. Let me know in the comments any questions that you have. And next up, I really will do new gear for 2024. And this is the part of the video where I'm supposed to ask you to subscribe by teasing you with something interesting coming up in that video, like telling you that I spent the most money on a single gear item I've ever spent. So if you want to find out what costs even more than a DCF tent, consider yourself teased. Okay guys, that's it for today. See you next time. Take care. Have you noticed how every backpacker first up was the newer upgrade to, instead of taking the actual extra effort to squeeze holding, instead of, okay, let's back up. Okay, I think we're going with that.